I stopped believing in coincidence the morning I found water pooling around Margaret Holloway's vault marker for the seventh consecutive day. My name is Director Vincent Hansen, and I have worked as the head funeral director at Sacred Heart Memorial Gardens in Bellingham, Washington for 18 years. In that time, I have overseen thousands of burials, maintained every crypt in our underground mausoleum, and learned to distinguish between structural problems and something else entirely. This was something else. The first time I noticed the moisture, I assumed it was condensation. Our crypt maintains a steady 58 degrees year round, and sometimes temperature differentials create small amounts of water accumulation near the ventilation ducts. I made a note to check the HVAC system and wiped the floor dry with my standard microfiber cloth. The water had no color, no obvious source, just a small pool, maybe 6 inches across, centered directly in front of vault marker 17B. The next morning, it was back. I checked the ceiling above the marker, bone dry. I checked the adjacent vaults, ran my hand along the marble walls, inspected every visible pipe junction within 20 feet. Nothing. The rest of the crypt floor was completely dry, just that one spot, that same 6-inch circle of clear water, positioned exactly where mourners would stand to pay their respects to Margaret Holloway. By the fourth day, I started keeping a mop bucket near the entrance. I would arrive at 6:30 each morning, descend the granite steps into the crypt's main corridor, and find the water waiting. Always the same amount, always centered on her marker. I began to dread the walk down those stairs. On day 5, I pulled Margaret Holloway's burial records from our archive room. The file was thin, the service small. She had been interred on November 14th, 1987. Cause of death was listed simply as drowning. The notation indicated her body had been recovered from the Nooksack River after 3 days in the water. I remember standing in that cramped office, the file folder trembling slightly in my hands, trying to convince myself that this meant nothing. That afternoon, I mopped the water again. As I wrung out the cloth into my bucket, I noticed something I had been too practical to acknowledge before. The water had a smell, faint, organic, like wet stones and old vegetation. River mud. I did not sleep well that night. Day 6 brought a new detail that made my chest tighten. The pool of water had expanded. Now it measured closer to 8 inches across, and the dampness had begun to creep up the base of the marble marker itself, darkening the stone in a way that looked almost intentional. I knelt down and touched the wet surface. The stone was ice cold, colder than the ambient temperature of the crypt could explain. My fingertips came away damp and smelling of earth. I tried to rationalize it. Underground springs, faulty sealant, some quirk of the marble's porosity. But I had worked with stone and burial vaults for nearly 2 decades, and I knew when something violated the ordinary laws of building maintenance. This violated them completely. On the 7th morning, I brought my assistant director, Carol Dinn, down to witness it. I needed someone else to confirm I was not imagining this. We stood together in the quiet crypt, fluorescent lights humming overhead, staring at the pooled water that had no logical source. How long has this been happening? Carol asked. Every day this week, I said. She crouched down, careful not to touch the water. Have you contacted a structural engineer? I wanted to see if it would stop on its own. Carol looked at me, and I saw the question she did not ask aloud. Why would it stop on its own? What did I think this was? I decided to stay late that evening. I told myself I wanted to observe the phenomenon during the off hours to see if the water appeared gradually or all at once. The truth was darker than that. I wanted to understand what Margaret Holloway was trying to tell me. The crypt felt different after sunset. The overhead lights seemed dimmer, the shadows between vaults deeper and more substantial. I sat on a stone bench 20 feet from marker 17B and waited. My watch ticked through the minutes. 7 o'clock became 8. 8 became 9. At 9:42, I heard it. A sound like water dripping, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. It was coming from the direction of Margaret Holloway's vault. I stood up, my shoes loud against the polished floor, and walked toward the sound. The pool of water had returned, but this time I watched it form. Small droplets appeared on the face of the marble marker itself, rolling down the stone, gathering at the base, spreading across the floor in that familiar 6-inch circle. There was no crack in the stone, no moisture source above or behind. The water was simply appearing, as if the vault itself were weeping. I reached out and pressed my palm flat against the marble. It was cold and wet, and beneath my hand I felt something I cannot adequately describe. A vibration, perhaps, or a rhythm, something that felt biological, like a pulse or a breath. I pulled my hand away and stepped back. The water continued to pool. The smell of river mud intensified. And in the absolute silence of that underground chamber, I understood that Margaret Holloway had been in the river for 3 days before they found her. 3 days in cold water, her body turning, the current pulling at her clothes and hair. 3 days of dark water filling her lungs and settling into her bones. I left the crypt and did not return until the following morning. When I descended the stairs at dawn, the floor around marker 17B was dry, completely dry. I knelt down and ran my hand across the stone. It was cool to the touch, normal, unremarkable. The water did not return the next day or the day after that. But sometimes, when I walk past Vault 17B during my morning inspections, I catch the faint smell of river mud and wet stone. And I remember the feeling of that pulse beneath my palm, that terrible rhythm that matched nothing living, and I walk a little faster toward the stairs. I do not linger near Margaret Holloway anymore. I do not think she wants me to. The knocking started the 3 months into my shift rotation, and I have not been able to unhear it since. My name is Lena Sokolova, and I have worked as the head groundskeeper at Westminster Parish Cemetery in Providence, Rhode Island, for 11 years. My responsibilities include maintaining the grounds above and conducting monthly structural inspections of the family crypts below. It is solitary work, methodical and quiet, which suited me perfectly until the day I placed my hand against the Caldwell family vault and felt something knock back. The inspection schedule is rigid. First Tuesday of every month, I descend into the lower crypts with my clipboard, flashlight, and moisture meter. I check for water damage, foundation cracks, any sign of settling or structural compromise. Most family vaults in Row K date back to the 1800s, and age has made them fragile. The Caldwell Vault sits at the end of the corridor, Vault 14, sealed since 1952 when the last family member was interred. That morning began like any other. I unlocked the iron gate at the corridor entrance, descended the stone steps, and began my inspection at Vault 1. The air down there is always cool and still, thick with the smell of old stone and earth. My footsteps echoed off the vaulted ceiling as I moved from vault to vault, marking my checklist, running my hands along seams and corners, checking for moisture, for shifting, for anything out of place. Vault 14 looked normal. The brass nameplate was tarnished but intact. Caldwell, established 1873. The marble facade showed hairline cracks consistent with age, nothing alarming. I placed my clipboard on the ground and ran my moisture meter along the base of the vault, checking for water seepage from the soil outside. That was when I heard it. 3 knocks, deliberate, spaced evenly apart, coming from inside the vault. I froze, moisture meter still pressed against the stone. My first thought was pipes. Old buildings settle, water moves through ancient plumbing, sounds travel in strange ways through stone corridors. But these were not settling sounds. These were knocks. Purposeful, human. I stepped back from the vault and waited. Silence. Just the hum of the ventilation system and my own breathing. I counted to 60, then approached the vault again. I placed my palm flat against the cool marble just above the nameplate. The knocking came again. 3 knocks, stronger this time, as if responding to my touch. I pulled my hand away like the stone had burned me. My heart was pounding, my mouth dry. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it along every seam of the vault, looking for gaps, for any explanation. The vault was sealed, completely sealed, marble facade, concrete backing, no visible cracks large enough for sound to travel through. I told myself it was acoustics, sound bouncing from somewhere else in the crypt, the angle of the corridor creating an illusion of proximity. I forced myself to finish the inspection, my hands shaking as I wrote notes on my clipboard. Vault 14, no structural damage, no moisture intrusion. I did not write anything about the knocking, but I could not stop thinking about it. That night, I pulled the burial records for the Caldwell family vault. 6 interments total, the last one dated May 9th, 1952. A woman named Iris Caldwell, age 71, heart failure. Before her, a succession of family members spanning 8 decades. The records were neat and thorough, each burial properly documented, each vault seal properly certified. The next month, I delayed the inspection until the afternoon. I told myself I was busy with other tasks, but the truth was I did not want to go down there. When I finally descended the steps to Row K, I moved quickly through the first 13 vaults, my inspection cursory and rushed. I saved Vault 14 for last. I stood in front of it for a long time before I touched it. The corridor was absolutely silent. No ventilation hum, no distant footsteps, nothing. Just stone and darkness and the weight of earth above me. I placed my hand against the marble. The knocking came immediately. 3 knocks, urgent, insistent, and this time I felt them. Vibrations traveling through the stone, through my palm, up my arm. These were not echoes, these were impacts. Something inside that vault was striking the interior wall. I pressed my ear against the cold marble. I do not know why I did this. Every rational part of my mind was screaming at me to leave, to go back up the stairs and into the daylight, but I needed to know. I heard breathing, faint, ragged, the sound of air moving in and out of lungs. And then, so quiet I almost missed it. A voice, not words, just a sound. A whimper, maybe, or a sigh. Human, unmistakably human. I stumbled backward, my flashlight clattering to the stone floor. The sound stopped. The breathing stopped. The knocking stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. I did not include Vault 14 in my report that month. I wrote that the corridor was inaccessible due to a locked gate, that I would complete the inspection the following month. It was a lie. The gate had not been locked. I had been too afraid to finish. The 3rd month, I brought a colleague, Michael Chen, our cemetery administrator, a practical man who had worked with burial vaults for 20 years. I told him I was hearing strange acoustics in row K, that I wanted a second opinion on Vault 14's structural integrity. We descended together. Michael chatted about drainage issues and foundation settling as we walked down the corridor. When we reached Vault 14, he ran his hand along the marble facade, utterly calm. "Looks solid to me," he said. "What acoustics were you concerned about?" I placed my palm against the stone. Nothing. No knocking, no vibrations, just cold marble, silent and still. Michael looked at me. "You feeling okay, Lena?" I nodded. I told him I must have been mistaken. We finished the inspection and returned to the surface. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know that when Michael placed his hand on that vault, nothing happened. The knocking only comes when I am alone. I still conduct my monthly inspections. I still walk down that corridor, past Vault 1, past Vault 7, past Vault 12. But when I reach Vault 14, I do not touch it anymore. I mark it as inspected on my clipboard, and I keep walking because the last time I placed my hand against that marble, the knocking lasted longer. 4 knocks instead of 3. And in the silence that followed, I heard that voice again, clearer this time. It was calling my name. I do not go down there alone anymore. And I do not answer when something calls me from inside a sealed vault where the last burial happened 73 years ago. I have prepared over 2,000 bodies for burial, and I remember every detail of exactly one. My name is Jude Alvaro, and I have worked as the chief embalmer at Riverside Funeral Services in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for 16 years. The work requires precision, respect, and a certain emotional distance that allows you to see the deceased as a responsibility rather than a tragedy. I have always maintained that distance until the night I prepared Eleanor Voss for her viewing and discovered that death is not always as still as we pretend it is. Eleanor came to us on a Wednesday evening in late September. Natural causes, age 84, no trauma, no complications. The family requested a traditional viewing, which meant standard embalming and cosmetic preparation. I received her just after 7 o'clock, once the daytime staff had left. I prefer working alone. The quiet helps me focus. I transferred her from the transport gurney to the preparation table, noting her physical characteristics in my standard intake log. Thin build, minimal muscle mass, liver spots on her hands and forearms. Her face had the sunken quality common in the very elderly, cheekbones prominent, skin like parchment. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested what would happen later. The embalming process took 90 minutes. I work methodically, carefully, following the same procedures I have followed thousands of times before: arterial injection, cavity treatment, feature setting. For Eleanor, I positioned her hands in the traditional crossed placement, right over left, resting on her abdomen. It is a pose meant to convey peace, dignity, a final rest. I adjusted her fingers until the positioning looked natural, then moved on to facial preparation. By 9:30, I had finished. Eleanor looked peaceful, grandmother-like, the way her family would want to remember her. I transferred her to the refrigeration unit in our viewing preparation room, locked the door, and went home. Standard procedure, nothing remarkable. The next morning, our viewing coordinator, Patricia Nguyen, called me at 6:45. Her voice was tight, uncertain. Quote 0. Quote 1, I said. Judge quote 2. Quote 3. I told Patricia I would be there in 20 minutes. I assumed someone on the morning staff had adjusted Eleanor during cosmetic touch-ups, or that Patricia was mistaken about the original positioning. Families sometimes request specific hand placements, rosaries, photographs, small keepsakes, and staff occasionally accommodates these requests without noting them in the log. When I arrived, Patricia was standing outside the preparation room, arms crossed. Looking uncomfortable, she said immediately. I opened the door. Eleanor lay exactly where I had left her, same position on the viewing table, same peaceful expression, except her hands were now left over right, the opposite of how I had positioned them. I stared at those folded hands for a long time. I replayed my preparation procedure in my mind, step by step. I distinctly remembered placing her right hand over her left. I had checked the positioning twice, the way I always do. This was not a mistake. Quote 6. I said, but I did not believe it. Patricia looked relieved. Some quote 7. I told her I would double check Eleanor before the family viewing that afternoon. Patricia left, and I stood alone in that quiet room, staring at Eleanor's hands. Left over right. Wrong, but perfectly positioned. deliberately positioned. I decided to review the security footage. Our preparation rooms are equipped with cameras for liability purposes, recording continuously on a 30-day loop. I went to the security office, logged into the system, and pulled up the previous night's footage from camera 3, which covers the preparation room. I watched myself finish Eleanor's preparation. I watched myself position her hands right over left, checking the placement carefully. I watched myself transfer her to the viewing table and leave the room at 9:38. The timestamp ticked forward. 9:45, 10 o'clock, 10:30. At 11:16, Eleanor's hands moved. Not quickly, not violently, slowly, deliberately. Her left hand slid out from beneath her right hand, lifted slightly, then settled on top. The movement took perhaps 20 seconds, smooth and purposeful, as if she were adjusting her position in sleep. Then she was still again, left over right. I sat in that security office, watching the timestamp continue forward, waiting for her to move again. She did not. At midnight, the overnight cleaning staff entered the building. At 1:15, they finished and left. At 6 o'clock, the morning staff arrived. Eleanor remained motionless throughout. I should have deleted that footage. I should have reformatted her hands, told no one, and proceeded with the viewing as planned. But I did not. I copied the footage to a thumb drive, logged out of the system, and returned to the preparation room. Eleanor looked exactly as she had in the video, peaceful, still, her hands folded left over right. I reached down and repositioned them, right over left, the way I had originally placed them. Her skin was cold and firm, exactly as it should be. No warmth, no flexibility beyond normal tissue relaxation. Dead. I locked the preparation room and went to my office. I did not watch the security footage again. I did not tell Patricia or anyone else on staff. The family viewing proceeded without incident that afternoon. Eleanor's daughter commented on how peaceful she looked, how the folded hands were perfect, right over left. After the service, after the family left, I returned to the preparation room. Eleanor had been transferred to the casket for transport to the cemetery. Her hands were still right over left, exactly as I had repositioned them that morning. I have not watched that security footage since. The thumb drive is in my desk drawer, and I think about throwing it away constantly, but I cannot because I need to know that it happened. I need evidence that Eleanor Voss moved her hands 11 hours after I finished her embalming, 11 hours after her heart had stopped beating, 11 hours after any medical definition of death would allow for voluntary movement. I still prepare bodies. I still position hands with care, right over left, the traditional way. But now, before I leave the preparation room, I take a photograph with my phone. Just the hands. Just the positioning. And the next morning, before anyone else arrives, I check. Most of the time, nothing has changed most of the time. But twice in the past year, I have found hands repositioned, left over right, deliberate, careful, wrong, and each time I have gone to the security office and confirmed what I already knew. The cameras show them moving, slowly, peacefully, long after death. I do not watch the tapes anymore. I simply reposition the hands, delete the footage, and continue with the viewing preparations. Because families deserve to remember their loved ones at rest. And I have learned that rest is not always the same as stillness. Some patterns are too deliberate to be accidental, and the condensation on vault wall 7C breathed with a rhythm I recognized too well. My name is Deshaun Porter, and I have worked as a maintenance supervisor at Magnolia Grove Cemetery in Charleston, South Carolina for 9 years. My job involves monitoring environmental conditions in our underground mausoleum, responding to humidity fluctuations, temperature irregularities, anything that might compromise the structural integrity of the vaults. I am trained to notice patterns. I am paid to understand what is normal and what is not. What I found on Vault Wall 7C was neither. The first time I noticed the condensation, I marked it as a humidity control issue. It was a Tuesday morning in early March, and I was conducting my weekly environmental audit. The mausoleum maintains a strict climate, 62 degrees, 40% humidity, designed to preserve both the structure and the remains within. Condensation should not form on interior vault walls. When I saw the moisture pattern on 7C, small droplets arranged in a rough oval shape, about chest height, I assumed the dehumidifier was malfunctioning. I checked the gauges. 62 degrees, 40% humidity. Perfect. I wiped the condensation away with my standard microfiber cloth and made a note to monitor the vault more closely. The moisture was cool to the touch, odorless, exactly like normal condensation. I thought nothing more of it. The next Tuesday, the pattern was back. Same location on the wall, same oval shape, about 18 inches tall and 10 inches wide. I checked the environmental controls again. Still perfect. I examined the vault's ventilation ducts, the ceiling above, the floor below. Everything was dry. Just that one patch of moisture, perfectly centered on Vault 7C. I pulled the burial records. The vault held Catherine Ann Brennan, interred August 6th, 2019, age 67, cause of death, respiratory failure due to pulmonary fibrosis. I stared at those words for a long time. Respiratory failure, breathing problems, lungs that had slowly stopped working. I returned to the vault and looked at the condensation pattern again. It was still there, unchanged, that oval of moisture on the marble wall. I pressed my hand against it. Cold, wet, unremarkable. I decided to document it. I took a photograph with my phone, noting the date and time, then wiped the wall dry. Protocol dictated that I report unusual environmental conditions to management, but I wanted to observe the pattern for one more week before filing a formal report. Condensation happens. Sometimes it defies easy explanation. I did not yet understand what I was looking at. The third Tuesday, I brought my thermal camera. It is a tool I use for detecting heat loss, for identifying areas where the mausoleum's climate control is failing. I pointed it at Vault 7C and looked at the screen. The condensation pattern showed up as a cool spot, several degrees below the ambient temperature of the surrounding marble. but the shape was more defined through the thermal lens. Not just an oval, a pattern, segments like ribs. I lowered the camera and stared at the wall. The moisture was forming in the shape of a rib cage, and as I watched, the droplets seemed to shift, expanding slightly, then contracting, expanding, contracting, a rhythm. I counted the intervals. 7 seconds between expansions, 7 seconds of contraction, steady, mechanical, regular, a breathing rate. I checked Catherine Brennan's medical records that afternoon. In the final stages of pulmonary fibrosis, her breathing rate had been documented by hospice nurses. 7 breaths per minute, slow, labored, the maximum her damaged lungs could manage, 7 seconds. Between breaths, I told myself it was confirmation bias. I was seeing patterns that were not there, projecting medical data onto random condensation. But when I returned to the mausoleum that evening, after hours, when the building was empty and silent, I brought a stopwatch. I stood in front of Vault 7C and waited. The condensation formed slowly, droplets appearing on the marble as if drawn by an invisible hand. And they moved, expanding outward in that ribcage pattern, holding for 7 seconds, then contracting, expanding, contracting. I timed it for 20 minutes. The pattern never varied, 7 seconds every time. I placed my hand against the wet marble and I felt it. A pressure, subtle, barely perceptible, but present. The wall was moving, expanding outward by maybe a millimeter, then contracting, breathing. I pulled my hand away and stepped back. The condensation continued its rhythm, indifferent to my presence. I thought about Catherine Brennan, about lungs that had slowly scarred and stiffened, about the final months when every breath was a conscious effort, when oxygen came in labored 7-second intervals. I left the mausoleum and did not return for 3 days. When I finally went back, I brought equipment, a digital recorder, a moisture meter, a second thermal camera. I needed documentation. I needed proof that this was real, that I was not imagining it. I set up the recorder first, positioning it to capture sound from Vault 7C. Then I waited. The condensation appeared on schedule, forming that same ribcage pattern, expanding and contracting with mechanical precision. I raised the thermal camera and recorded the temperature fluctuations. Cool spots forming, dissipating, forming again. And then I heard it, faint, almost inaudible, a sound like air moving through a narrow passage, a wheeze, not continuous, but rhythmic. 7 seconds of silence, then a wheeze. 7 seconds, another wheeze. I checked the recorder. It was capturing the sound. I stood in front of that vault for an hour, watching the condensation breathe, listening to the wheeze of air that had no source. When I finally left, I took the recorder with me. I listened to the audio file 3 times that night. The wheezing was there, clear and distinct, timed perfectly with the condensation's rhythm. 7 seconds. Every time I filed my report the next morning, environmental anomaly, Vault 7C, condensation pattern requiring investigation. I did not mention the breathing. I did not mention the sound. I wrote it up as a humidity control issue and recommended monitoring. Management sent a contractor to inspect the vault. He found nothing. No structural damage, no ventilation problems, no source for the condensation. He sealed some minor cracks in the marble facade and called it resolved. But every Tuesday, when I conduct my environmental audit, I check Vault 7C. The condensation is always there. The pattern is always the same, expanding, contracting, that slow 7-second rhythm that matches the final breaths of a woman whose lungs forgot how to work. I do not touch the wall anymore. I do not record the sound. I simply note it in my log as persistent minor condensation and move on to the next vault. Because Catherine Brennan spent her final months fighting for every breath, and I think some part of her is still fighting, still breathing in 7-second intervals, still trying to fill lungs that no longer exist. I hear the wheezing sometimes, even when I am not standing in front of the vault, and I wonder if she knows she does not need to breathe anymore, if anyone has told her she can stop. I wonder if she is waiting for permission to finally let go. I found the letter on a Thursday morning, tucked into the door slot of Crypt Vault 12, addressed to a man who had been dead for 62 years. My name is Iris Chen, and I have worked as the cemetery records clerk at Greenwood Memorial Park in Portland, Oregon for 14 years. My responsibilities include maintaining burial records, processing visitor requests, and managing the administrative details that keep a cemetery running smoothly. I am meticulous about documentation, about dates and signatures, and the paper trail that proves who rests where. That is why the letter disturbed me so deeply, because the handwriting matched perfectly and the date made no sense at all. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive stock, the kind people use for formal correspondence. It was not weathered or yellowed. It looked fresh, recently placed. I discovered it during my morning walkthrough of the main mausoleum, where I check for maintenance issues and ensure everything is in order before we open to visitors at 9 o'clock. The envelope had been pushed through the narrow mail slot in the bronze door of Vault 12, positioned as if someone had slid it through deliberately, carefully. I pulled it out and examined it. No postage, no return address, just a name written in elegant cursive across the front. Thomas Whitmore. I recognized the name immediately. Thomas Whitmore occupied Vault 12, interred September 3rd, 1963. I knew this because I had digitized his burial record myself 3 years ago, part of our ongoing archival project. The envelope was sealed. I should not have opened it. Visitor correspondence, even correspondence left at grave sites, is technically private, but the placement was so deliberate, so careful, and I needed to understand who had left it and why. I slid my finger under the flap and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of matching cream stationery. Folded once, I unfolded it and read, "Dearest Thomas, I waited as long as I could. The garden still blooms each spring, though I cannot tend it the way you taught me. I hope you can forgive the weeds. I will be with you soon. All my love, Margaret." The letter was dated 3 days ago, March 17th, 2025. I stood in that quiet corridor, holding a letter written this week to a man buried in 1963, and felt something cold settle in my chest. I walked quickly back to my office, pulled Thomas Whitmore's burial file, and spread the documents across my desk. Thomas Whitmore, born April 11th, 1918, died September 1st, 1963. Cause of death, heart attack. Survived by his wife, Margaret Whitmore. Her signature appeared on several documents in the file: the burial authorization, the property deed for the vault, the final payment receipt. I placed the letter next to the burial authorization and compared the signatures. They matched perfectly. The same flowing script, the same distinctive capital M in Margaret, the same slight backward slant to the letters. Not similar, identical. I sat down slowly, my hands beginning to shake. There were explanations. A relative with similar handwriting, a daughter or granddaughter named after Margaret, someone honoring a family tradition by writing letters to the deceased. People grieve in unusual ways. This could be explained. I pulled Margaret Whitmore's death record. She had passed away on January 12th, 1998, 35 years after her husband. She was buried in the same mausoleum, Vault 18, one corridor over from Thomas. I looked at the letter again, dated 3 days ago, written in handwriting that matched a woman who had been dead for 27 years. I should have filed the letter with Thomas's records and forgotten about it. I should have assumed it was a family member, a coincidence, something explicable. But I could not stop thinking about the date, about the phrase, "I will be with you soon." That afternoon, I walked to Vault 18, Margaret's vault. The bronze door was polished and clean, maintained by the regular staff. I stood in front of it for a long time, studying the nameplate, the dates engraved in neat capitals. Margaret Ann Whitmore, beloved wife, 1922 to 1998. I returned to my office and pulled the visitor log for the past week. We require all visitors to sign in at the main office, recording their name, the date, and which section they are visiting. I scanned through the entries for the past 7 days. No one had signed in to visit the mausoleum corridor containing Vault 12. I checked the security camera footage next. Our cameras cover the main entrance and the primary corridors. I reviewed footage from the morning I found the letter, working backward from 6:30 when I arrived. The corridor containing Vault 12 appeared empty all night. No visitors, no movement. At 5:48 in the morning, the camera feed pixelated briefly, a digital glitch lasting maybe 3 seconds. When the feed stabilized, the corridor was still empty, but I had found the letter at 6:35, 47 minutes after that glitch. I reviewed the footage from the previous night and the night before that. Each night, at exactly 5:48 in the morning, the camera feed glitched. 3 seconds of pixelation, then normal feed. Nothing unusual except the timing. The same time, every morning, for at least the past week. I did not know what to do with this information. I considered calling our security supervisor, filing a report, requesting an investigation, but I could not explain what I suspected without sounding irrational. Instead, I placed the letter in a protective sleeve and filed it with Thomas Whitmore's burial records. I noted the date I found it, the location, the details of the handwriting match. I documented everything. 2 weeks later, I found another letter. Same envelope, same cream stationery, same elegant script, same impossible date. This one was shorter. Thomas, the pain is worse now. I am ready. I did not open any more letters after that. When I find them, every few weeks, always on a Thursday, always tucked into the door slot of Vault 12, I place them unopened in Thomas's file. There are 7 now, 7 letters written in handwriting that matches a woman buried in Vault 18, dated with contemporary dates, addressed to a man who has been dead since 1963. I do not check the security footage anymore. I do not compare signatures. I simply file the letters and continue my work, because I think Margaret Whitmore is keeping a promise. She said she would be with Thomas soon, and I believe her. I believe she has been writing to him across the gap between their vaults, across the years that separated their deaths, telling him she is coming. And someday, I think the letters will stop, not because she has given up, but because she will no longer need to write them. I found the most recent letter yesterday. The envelope was heavier this time, bulkier. Inside was the usual cream stationery and something else. A single dried rose, pressed flat, still faintly fragrant. The note was brief. Soon, my love, very soon. I filed it with the others, and I try not to think about what will happen when the letters finally stop arriving, because I know where Margaret is buried. I know that Vault 18 is just one corridor away from Vault 12, and I wonder if the distance between them has been too far for too long. I have mapped every temperature variance in our mausoleum, and Vault 33 refuses to obey the laws of thermodynamics. My name is Marcus Webb, and I have worked as the crypt keeper at Hillside Memorial Mausoleum in Minneapolis, Minnesota for 22 years. My job requires me to maintain optimal climate conditions for preservation, which means monitoring temperature fluctuations with obsessive precision. I know the ambient temperature of every corridor, every vault, every square foot of our underground facility. I know what is normal. Vault 33 is 18 degrees colder than physically possible, and it has been that way since the day Rebecca Hartman was interred. The temperature monitoring began as routine maintenance. Our mausoleum operates on a sophisticated HVAC system designed to maintain a constant 60 degrees throughout the facility. When I noticed inconsistencies during my quarterly audit, I assumed we had a mechanical failure somewhere in the ductwork. I started mapping temperatures systematically, using a professional grade infrared thermometer, recording readings at every vault. Most of the facility registered between 59 and 61 degrees. Normal variance. Expected, but when I aimed my thermometer at Vault 33, the reading dropped to 42 degrees. I checked the thermometer calibration. Perfect. I checked the HVAC output in that corridor, functioning normally, pushing 60-degree air through the vents. I placed my hand against the marble facade of Vault 33. It was ice cold, not cool, not chilled, ice cold. the kind of cold that makes your fingers ache after a few seconds of contact. I pulled Rebecca Hartman's burial record that afternoon. Interred March 9th, 2023, age 51, cause of death, hypothermia. She had been found frozen in her home after a heating system failure during a blizzard, dead for approximately 48 hours before discovery. I stared at those words. Hypothermia, frozen to death, and now her vault registered 18 degrees below the ambient temperature of the surrounding structure. I told myself it was a coincidence. Temperature differentials happen. Stone conducts cold differently depending on mineral composition. There were rational explanations. I documented the reading in my maintenance log and moved on with my quarterly audit. But the temperature haunted me. The next week, I returned to Vault 33 with more equipment. I brought a thermal imaging camera, a hygrometer to measure humidity, and a data logger to record temperature over a 24-hour period. If there was a mechanical explanation for the cold spot, I would find it. I set up the data logger first, placing it on a small shelf directly in front of Vault 33. The device would record temperature readings every 15 minutes, creating a detailed map of any fluctuations. Then I used the thermal camera to scan the entire corridor. The thermal image was striking. The corridor showed as a uniform blue-green, indicating consistent temperature throughout, except Vault 33. It appeared as a dark blue spot, significantly cooler than everything around it. The cold radiated outward from the vault in a perfect circle, about 6 feet in diameter, as if the cold were emanating from inside the vault itself. I checked the vaults on either side. Normal temperature. I checked the floor, the ceiling, the walls. All normal. Just that one vault, that one 6-foot circle of impossible cold. I left the data logger running and returned the next day to collect it. The results were consistent. For 24 hours straight, the temperature in front of Vault 33 had registered between 40 and 43 degrees. No fluctuations, no variation, just constant, unexplainable cold. I showed the data to our facility manager, Daniel Ortiz. He listened to my explanation, reviewed my documentation, and called in an HVAC specialist to inspect the system. The specialist spent 3 hours examining ductwork, checking airflow, testing output temperatures. He found nothing wrong. He told me. Quote 1. I asked him to measure the temperature at Vault 33 himself. He did, 42 degrees. He checked his thermometer calibration, measured again, same result. He looked at me, confused. Quote 2, he said. Quote 3. He left. Daniel told me to keep monitoring it, to document any changes. I agreed, but I knew the temperature would not change. I knew this cold was not mechanical. That night, I went down to the mausoleum alone. It was nearly 11 o'clock, long after visiting hours, long after the day staff had gone home. I wanted to experience the cold spot without distractions, without the clinical distance of thermometers and thermal cameras. I walked down the corridor toward Vault 33. The air was still, quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. As I approached the vault, I felt the temperature drop. not gradually, suddenly, like walking through an invisible barrier into winter. I stood in front of Rebecca Hartman's vault and breathed out. My breath misted in the air, a visible cloud of condensation that should not have been possible at 60 degrees. I placed both hands flat against the marble. The cold was immediate and painful, like touching metal in freezing weather. I pulled my hands away and saw my palms were red, almost frostbitten from just seconds of contact. I stepped back, rubbing my hands together for warmth, and noticed something else. The cold spot was not uniform. It was strongest directly in front of the vault, at chest height, roughly where a person's core would be if they were standing inside. I thought about Rebecca Hartman, about dying slowly in a freezing house, about her core temperature dropping degree by degree until her heart stopped. I thought about the cold settling into her bones, into her organs, into every cell of her body, and I wondered if that cold had never left. I started avoiding Vault 33 after that. During my temperature audits, I would take readings from 15 feet away, using my infrared thermometer rather than approaching the vault directly. The readings never changed, always 42 degrees, always 18 degrees too cold. Other staff members began noticing it too. Our florist, Maria Santos, complained about the cold when she delivered flowers to Vault 32, adjacent to Rebecca's. She said it made her hands ache. Our chaplain mentioned feeling a chill near that section of the corridor, even though the rest of the mausoleum felt comfortable. No one could stand in front of Vault 33 for more than a minute or two. The cold became physically painful. Several visitors asked us to adjust the heating, not understanding that the heating was working perfectly everywhere, except that one impossible spot. I stopped trying to explain it. I simply warned new staff members to dress warmly when working in that corridor, and I continued my documentation. Temperature readings every week, thermal imaging every month. The data never varied. Last winter, during a particularly harsh cold snap, I noticed something new. Ice had formed on the exterior of Vault 33's marble facade. Small crystals, delicate and precise, spreading across the stone in fractal patterns. The ambient temperature in the corridor was still 60 degrees. Ice should not have been forming. I photographed it, documented it, and watched it melt over the course of an hour as the marble slowly warmed. But the vault itself remained cold, always cold. Rebecca Hartman has been dead for 2 years now. Her vault maintains its impossible temperature, defying every principle of thermodynamics I understand. I have stopped looking for mechanical explanations because I think Rebecca Hartman died cold, and some part of her is still cold, still frozen in that last terrible moment when her body temperature dropped below the threshold of survival. I think the cold is all she has left, and she is holding on to it. And every time I walk past Vault 33 and feel that sudden drop in temperature, I wonder if she knows. If she understands that she is not freezing anymore, that the cold cannot hurt her. I wonder if anyone has told her she can let go. The humming from Crypt Vault 9 begins every Tuesday at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I have learned not to be there when it starts. My name is An Soo Jin, and I have worked as a groundskeeper at St. Catherine's Cemetery in Burlington, Vermont for 7 years. My duties include maintaining the grounds above and performing weekly structural checks of the crypts below. I am responsible for the cleanliness, safety, and dignity of this place. I take that responsibility seriously, but there are some things that cannot be cleaned away, and some sounds that should not exist in a sealed stone vault where the last burial happened 43 years ago. The first time I heard the humming, I thought someone had left a radio playing in the crypt. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April, just after 4 o'clock. I was mopping the corridor floor near Vault 9 when I heard it. Low, melodic, sustained. A single note held for several seconds, then shifting to another note, then another. A hymn, I realized. Someone was humming a hymn. I stopped mopping and listened. The sound was coming from Vault 9. I approached the sealed marble door and pressed my ear against the stone. The humming was clearer now, a woman's voice, gentle and practiced, moving through the melody with perfect pitch. I recognized the hymn, How Great Thou Art. We play it sometimes at graveside services. It is a common funeral hymn, especially for older congregants. I pulled away from the vault and looked around the corridor. Empty. No visitors, no other staff. Just me and the sound of humming coming from inside a sealed vault. I checked the vault's brass nameplate. Dorothy May Harrison, born June 7th, 1912, died September 21st, 1982. Beloved mother and servant of God. I walked quickly back to the groundskeeper's office and pulled Dorothy Harrison's burial file. The intake form included a section for personal information, details that family members sometimes provide to help us honor their loved ones appropriately. Under quote 1, someone had written in neat cursive, choir director at St. Catherine's for 40 years. Her voice brought joy to every service. I closed the file and sat at my desk for a long time. The humming had stopped. The crypt was silent again. I told myself I had imagined it, that the acoustics in the crypt corridors sometimes carry sound in strange ways, that maybe someone had been humming outside and the sound had traveled. But I knew what I had heard, and I knew it had come from inside Vault 9. The next Tuesday, I made sure to be in the crypt at 4 o'clock. I brought my phone to record the sound, evidence that I was not losing my mind. I positioned myself near Vault 9 and waited. At exactly 4 o'clock, the humming began. The same hymn, the same gentle, practiced melody. How great thou art, sung wordlessly in a woman's voice that sounded like it had spent decades leading congregations in song. I held up my phone and recorded for 3 minutes. The humming continued, never wavering, never pausing for breath. Then, at 4:03, it stopped. Complete silence, as if someone had simply walked away mid-verse. I played back the recording, static. 3 minutes of faint static, but no humming. The sound had not recorded. I tried again the following Tuesday, same result. The humming was clear and unmistakable when I stood in that corridor, but my phone captured nothing. I started checking the burial records for patterns. Dorothy Harrison's funeral had been held on a Tuesday. September 21st, 1982, was a Tuesday. The service had started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Every Tuesday at 4 o'clock, Dorothy Harrison hummed the opening hymn from her own funeral service. I began to dread Tuesdays, not because the humming frightened me exactly, but because it made me profoundly sad. There was something lonely about that sound, something that suggested Dorothy Harrison was still doing what she had always done, still leading a congregation that no longer existed, still singing for people who could no longer hear her. I mentioned it once to Father Miguel, our cemetery chaplain. I asked him, carefully, whether he believed the dead could sing. He looked at me for a long moment. Why do you ask? I told him about the humming, about Vault 9, about Tuesdays at 4 o'clock. Father Miguel did not laugh or dismiss me. He simply nodded. I asked. I considered this. The humming was not anguished or desperate. It was peaceful, practiced, the sound of someone doing what they loved. I said. Father Miguel smiled. Quote a 10. I tried to follow his advice. I tried to accept the humming as a benign presence, a reminder that Dorothy Harrison had loved this church and this cemetery enough to stay. But the sound still unsettled me, not because it was frightening, but because it was so human. On the 41st anniversary of Dorothy's funeral, I went down to the crypt at 4 o'clock. September 21st, a Tuesday. I brought flowers, white carnations, and placed them on the small shelf outside Vault 9. The humming began right on schedule, perfect pitch, perfect timing. I sat on the floor in front of the vault and listened. I listened to the entire hymn all the way through, and then I heard something new. After the final note faded, there was a pause, and then another hymn began. Shohotim 12. Also wordless, also perfect, Dorothy Harrison sang 6 hymns that afternoon. I sat and listened to everyone. When the last note faded at 4:32, I whispered, quote 13. The silence that followed felt different, not empty, acknowledged. I still hear the humming every Tuesday at 4 o'clock. I have stopped trying to record it. I have stopped trying to explain it to people who were not there. I simply make sure that Vault 9 is clean, that the corridor is respectful, that Dorothy Harrison's nameplate is polished and readable. And sometimes, when I am feeling particularly lonely, or when the work feels especially heavy, I go down to the crypt at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday and I listen. I sit on the floor in front of Vault 9 and I let Dorothy Harrison's voice fill that cold stone corridor with something that sounds like grace. Because for 40 years, Dorothy Harrison led her congregation in worship. She gave them music when they needed comfort. She gave them melody when words were not enough. And I think she is still doing that, still offering her gift, still singing for anyone willing to listen. Last Tuesday, I brought my own voice. When Dorothy began humming, quote 14, I hummed along, quietly, uncertainly. My voice is not trained or beautiful, but I followed her melody as best I could. The humming from Vault 9 seemed to swell, just slightly, not louder Exactly. Fuller, as if Dorothy Harrison recognized that she was not singing alone anymore. We finished the hymn together, her voice steady and mine faltering but present. When the final note faded, I sat in the silence and felt something I had not expected: peace. Dorothy Harrison died 43 years ago, but every Tuesday at 4 o'clock, she leads a congregation of one through the hymns she loved. And I have learned that some voices are too beautiful to be silenced by death. I have learned that singing is not just for the living. And I have learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply to listen. I review our visitor sign-in logs every Friday afternoon, and for 6 months, the same name appeared in the same handwriting, visiting the same vault where that exact name is carved into marble. My name is Director Lucas Chen, and I have managed Evergreen Hills Mausoleum in Sacramento, California for 19 years. Part of my weekly routine involves reviewing visitor logs, monitoring foot traffic patterns, and ensuring our guests are properly accounted for. We require all visitors to sign in at our main desk, recording their name, date, time, and which vault they are visiting. It is a simple security measure, one we have maintained for decades. I never expected it to become evidence of something I still cannot rationally explain. The first time I noticed the name, it meant nothing to me. Alan Voss, signed in on a Wednesday afternoon, visiting Vault 23. The handwriting was neat, masculine, slightly slanted to the right. Unremarkable. We receive hundreds of visitors each month. I filed the log sheet without a second thought. The following Wednesday, the name appeared again. Alan Voss, same handwriting, Vault 23, same time, roughly 2:30 in the afternoon. By the fourth week, I recognized the pattern. Every Wednesday at approximately 2:30, Alan Voss signed our visitor log and listed Vault 23 as his destination. Regular visits are common. People maintain weekly or monthly routines, visiting their deceased loved ones with devotional consistency. I appreciated the dedication, but something about the name bothered me. It felt familiar in a way I could not place. During a slow afternoon in early October, I pulled the burial records for Vault 23. The vault held 3 interments. Richard Voss died 1976, Catherine Voss died 1984, and Alan Voss died July 9th, 1998. I read that last entry 3 times. Alan Voss died July 9th, 1998. 27 years ago, I opened our current visitor log and found the most recent entry. October 6th, 2025. Alan Voss, Vault 23. The handwriting was neat and masculine, slightly slanted to the right. I sat at my desk with both documents in front of me, trying to construct a reasonable explanation. A son or grandson named after the deceased. A nephew. Someone honoring a family name, but the signatures bothered me. They were not just similar, they were identical. The same formation of the capital A in Allen, the same distinctive loop in the capital Vi, the same pressure and spacing. I pulled Alan Voss's original burial paperwork from our archives, his death certificate, his intake forms, documents signed by family members authorizing his interment. One document included Alan Voss's own signature, notarized 3 years before his death as part of his pre-need burial arrangements. I placed it next to the visitor log entry from October 6th. They matched perfectly. I closed the files and tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Forgery. Someone practicing Alan Voss's signature for reasons I could not fathom. A peculiar coincidence. Handwriting similarities between family members. There had to be an explanation that did not involve a dead man signing our visitor log every Wednesday for 6 months. The next Wednesday, I positioned myself at the front desk at 2:15. I told our receptionist, Maria Delgado, that I would handle visitor check-ins for the afternoon. I wanted to see who signed that name. 2:30 came and went. No visitors. By 3 o'clock, I assumed the pattern had broken. I returned to my office, disappointed and oddly relieved. When I checked the visitor log at 5 o'clock, there was a new entry. Alan Voss, Vault 23, time 2:32. The handwriting was identical. I showed the entry to Maria. She looked confused, I said. Maria shrugged, but I had been watching, and the log sheet had been blank at 2:15. I had checked it specifically. I decided to review our security camera footage. We have cameras covering the main entrance and the reception desk. If someone had entered the building, the cameras would have recorded it. I pulled up Wednesday's footage and watched from 2 o'clock onward. The reception area was empty, except for Maria leaving for lunch at 2:03. The camera showed me arriving at the desk at 2:14, sitting down, checking my phone, organizing paperwork. At 2:32, something strange happened. The camera feed pixelated briefly, a digital glitch lasting perhaps 2 seconds. When the feed stabilized, I was still sitting at the desk, still looking at my phone. Nothing had changed, but the visitor log now showed Alan Voss's signature. I had been sitting 3 feet away from that logbook. I had been staring directly at it, and I had not seen anyone approach. I had not heard the pen move across the paper. I had not seen the signature appear. I watched the footage 4 times. Each time, the same 2-second glitch. Each time, the signature simply appeared. I started checking earlier logs. I requested visitor records going back a full year. Alan Voss's name appeared every single Wednesday for the past 52 weeks. Always 2:30, always Vault 23, always the same handwriting. I contacted the family listed in Alan Voss's burial file. His daughter, Patricia Reynolds, was still living in Sacramento. I called her and asked carefully whether anyone in the family had been visiting Vault 23 regularly. Not for years, she said. My father's been gone a long time. I visit on his birthday and Father's Day, but that's it. Why? I told her we were updating our records, thanked her, and ended the call. I did not mention the visitor log. I did not know how to explain it. The following Wednesday, I went down to Vault 23 at 2:30. I wanted to be there when Alan Voss arrived. I wanted to see what happened. The corridor was quiet and empty. Vault 23 sat in the middle of a row of identical marble facades, distinguished only by its nameplate: Richard Voss, Catherine Voss, Alan Voss, dates of birth and death engraved in neat capitals. I stood in front of the vault and waited. 2:30 came. I felt nothing, saw nothing, heard nothing. But when I returned to the front desk at 3 o'clock, Alan Voss had signed the log. 2:34. Same handwriting, same vault. I have stopped trying to catch him. I have stopped watching the cameras, stopped positioning myself at the desk on Wednesday afternoons, because I know now that Alan Voss will visit Vault 23 every Wednesday at approximately 2:30, and I will never see him arrive. I think Alan Voss is doing what he did every Wednesday when he was alive: visiting his parents, honoring their memory, maintaining a routine that death has not interrupted. The visitor log now contains 68 entries in Alan Voss's handwriting, spanning more than a year. I have filed them all carefully. I have documented the pattern. I have accepted what the evidence shows me. Because Alan Voss has been dead for 27 years, but every Wednesday he signs our visitor log in handwriting that matches perfectly, and he visits Vault 23, where his name is carved in marble alongside his parents. And I wonder if he knows, if he understands that he is not alive anymore, if anyone has told him that the visits can stop. Or maybe he does know. Maybe he simply chooses to keep coming, to keep honoring the Wednesday afternoon routine he maintained for decades. Last Wednesday, I left a small note near Vault 23. Just 2 words, handwritten: "Thank you." When I checked Thursday morning, the note was gone, and I think that is answer enough. I clean the mausoleum floors every Thursday morning before we open to visitors, and the muddy footprint in Corridor C appeared the day after I buried Thomas Reeves in Vault 41. My name is Rashid Coleman, and I have worked as a maintenance worker at Heritage Gardens Memorial Park in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 13 years. My job is simple. I keep the mausoleum clean, the floors polished, the marble shining. I take pride in my work. I take pride in maintaining a space where people come to grieve without distraction. That is why the footprint disturbed me so deeply, because I had just cleaned that floor the day before, and the print was fresh, and it should not have been possible. The footprint appeared on a Friday morning in early November. I arrived at 6 o'clock, my usual time, unlocked the mausoleum, and began my routine inspection. Corridor C is near the back of the building, less trafficked than the main halls, quieter. I had mopped it thoroughly on Thursday afternoon after Thomas Reeves's interment service ended. The floor should have been spotless. Instead, there was a single muddy footprint right in front of Vault 41, Thomas Reeves's vault. I stopped pushing my cleaning cart and stared at it. The print was clear and detailed, a boot print, men's size, probably a 10 or 11 based on the length. The mud was dark, rich with organic matter, the kind you find in garden beds or freshly turned soil. The print faced the vault, as if someone had been standing there, looking at Thomas Reeves's nameplate. I checked the floor around it. No other prints, no trail leading to or from the mark, just that single footprint, isolated and impossible. I pulled out my phone and photographed it before cleaning it away. I told myself someone must have come in after my Thursday cleaning, maybe a late visitor or a staff member I had not seen. But we lock the mausoleum at 5 o'clock, and I am the only maintenance worker with after hours access. I mopped the footprint away and continued my morning routine, but I could not stop thinking about it. That afternoon, I pulled Thomas Reeves's burial file. I wanted to understand who he was, why someone might have visited his vault and left mud on my clean floor. The file was standard. Thomas Reeves, age 73, retired gardener, died of a heart attack on November 1st, buried November 3rd. Yesterday, retired gardener. I read that line 3 times. Gardener, someone who worked with soil, with plants, with earth. Someone whose boots would have been caked with mud more often than not. I checked the personal effects inventory that his family had provided. The list included the clothes Thomas was buried in, work pants, flannel shirt, his favorite boots. Size 11. My hands started shaking as I held that paper. The next Thursday, I cleaned Corridor C with extra attention, making sure every inch of floor was polished and spotless. I finished at 4:30, locked the mausoleum at 5, and went home. When I arrived Friday morning at 6, the footprint was back. Same location, same boot print, same dark mud, right in front of Vault 41. This time, I did not clean it immediately. I called our cemetery director, Helen Martinez, and asked her to come look at something. She arrived 20 minutes later, and I showed her the footprint. Pauto amal koto. I asked. Helen checked the visitor log on her phone. Zal soaked want swam. I nodded. She looked at the footprint, then at me. Quote 2. I told her about the previous Friday, about the boot size matching Thomas Reeves's burial inventory, about him being a gardener. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Clean it up, and let's keep this between us for now." I mopped the footprint away, but I knew it would come back. The following Thursday, I decided to stay late. I finished my cleaning at 4:30, locked all the entrances except the main door, and I hid in my maintenance closet near Corridor C. I wanted to see who was leaving that print. I wanted to catch them in the act. The mausoleum was silent after closing. The kind of silence that feels heavy, dense, with the weight of stone and earth and all the people resting in their vaults. I sat in the darkness of my closet, door cracked open just enough to see down Corridor C toward Vault 41. Hours passed. 6 o'clock became 7. 7 became 8. My legs cramped. My back ached, but I waited. At 8:47, I heard something, not footsteps exactly, more like a settling sound. The way soil sounds when it shifts or compresses. It came from Corridor C. I pushed my closet door open slowly, quietly. The corridor was dark, except for the emergency exit lights casting a dim red glow. I could see the polished floor reflecting that light. could see the marble vaults lined up on both sides. And then I saw the footprint forming, not someone stepping in mud and leaving a print. The mud was appearing on the floor, darkening the polished surface, taking shape. Toe, arch, heel, the boot tread becoming visible, detailed, as if an invisible foot were pressing down on invisible mud and transferring the impression to my clean floor. The print completed itself and then stopped. No one was there, no sound, just a fresh, muddy footprint in front of Vault 41, facing the nameplate where Thomas Reeves's name was engraved. I stood frozen in the doorway of my closet, watching that impossible footprint, and I understood. Thomas Reeves had spent his entire life in gardens. Soil under his fingernails, mud on his boots, his hands in the earth, planting and tending and coaxing life from the ground. That was who he was. That was his identity. And now, once a week, he was leaving evidence of that life. A muddy boot print, a gardener's mark. I did not clean it that night. I locked the mausoleum and went home and did not sleep well. The next morning, I returned with Helen. I showed her the footprint. She asked me to explain how I knew it would be there. I told her about staying late, about watching it form, about there being no one in the corridor. Helen looked at me for a long time. Then she said, I said. She nodded slowly. We made an agreement that day. I would continue my Thursday cleaning routine. I would polish Corridor C until it gleamed, and every Friday morning I would find that footprint in front of Vault 41, and I would photograph it, and I would clean it away. Because Thomas Reeves was a gardener, he worked with his hands. He left traces of his labor wherever he went, and death had not changed that. I have 68 photographs of that boot print now, one for every Friday since Thomas Reeves was interred. The prints are always identical, always the same size, same tread pattern, same dark mud. I have stopped trying to explain it. I have stopped wondering why it happens. I simply accept that once a week, Thomas Reeves leaves evidence of the life he lived, and I am the one who witnesses it. Last Thursday, I did something different. After cleaning Corridor C, I placed a small pot of basil near Vault 41. Just a tiny herb plant, the kind you might keep on a kitchen windowsill, a gardener's plant. Friday morning, the footprint was there as always, but the basil plant had been moved, just slightly, turned to face the vault, as if someone had adjusted it to catch better light. And the soil in the pot showed the impression of a thumb, a gardener's thumb pressing gently into the earth, checking moisture, testing readiness. I tend that basil plant now. I water it on Thursdays. I make sure it gets indirect light from the corridor windows. And every Friday, I find it slightly adjusted, the soil bearing new thumbprints, because Thomas Reeves is still a gardener, and gardeners tend to living things, even when they are not living any more themselves. The flower petals appear in groups of 7, arranged in perfect circles around Vault 18, and they return every 7th day with a precision that makes my skin crawl. My name is Meera Patel, and I have worked as a groundskeeper at Meadowbrook Cemetery in Ann Arbor, Michigan for 8 years. My responsibilities include maintaining grave sites, removing wilted flowers, and ensuring the cemetery grounds remain dignified and peaceful. I am accustomed to the small rituals people perform at graves: fresh flowers every week, coins on military headstones, photographs tucked into memorial plaques. But the petals around Sarah Whitfield's crypt are different. They are not left by mourners. They appear on their own, in patterns that follow a terrible arithmetic I have come to dread. The first time I noticed the petals, I assumed someone had scattered them during a private memorial. It was early on a Thursday morning in March, 7 days after Sarah Whitfield had been interred. I was doing my routine walkthrough of the mausoleum grounds when I saw them. White rose petals, fresh and fragrant, arranged in 7 small clusters around the entrance to Vault 18. Each cluster contained exactly 7 petals. I swept them away and added fresh mulch to the flower bed. Standard maintenance. 7 days later, they were back. 7 clusters, 7 petals each. Same arrangement, positioned at precise intervals around the vault entrance, forming a perfect circle. I checked the visitor log. No one had signed in to visit Vault 18. I asked our other groundskeeper, Marcus, if he had seen anyone near that section. He had not. I swept the petals away again, but I counted them this time. 49 petals total, 7 times 7. 7 days later, they appeared again. I pulled Sarah Whitfield's burial file that afternoon. I needed to understand who she was, whether the petals meant something to her family, whether this was some kind of memorial tradition I was not aware of. The file was thin and heartbreaking. Sarah Whitfield, age 34, died of complications from a 7th miscarriage. The medical summary was clinical and devastating. 7 pregnancies, 7 losses, no living children. I sat in the cemetery office with that file open on my desk, staring at the number 7. 7 miscarriages, 7 clusters of petals. 7 petals per cluster, every 7 days. I told myself it was a coincidence. Grief makes people do unusual things. Maybe Sarah's husband was leaving the petals as a memorial. Maybe her mother or sister. Someone who understood the significance of the number 7, who wanted to honor the losses Sarah had endured. But when I checked the visitor logs for the weeks the petals appeared, no one had signed in. The petals continued to appear every Thursday. Always 7 clusters, always 7 petals each, always fresh, as if they had been cut that morning. I started photographing them before sweeping them away, documenting the pattern, trying to find some variation that would make this feel random, natural, explicable. The patterns never varied. On the 7th week, something changed. The petals were arranged differently. Instead of 7 loose clusters, they formed a shape, a small outline, delicate and unmistakable, the shape of a tiny hand, baby-sized. The petals curved to suggest fingers, a palm, a wrist. I stood looking at that pattern for a long time before I could bring myself to sweep it away. The following week, there were 2 hands, each made of 7 petals. I contacted Sarah Whitfield's husband, James. I told him I had noticed someone had been leaving flowers at his wife's vault, and I wanted to make sure the groundskeeping staff was not disturbing any memorial arrangements he had made. Quote, Sipple zero, James said. His voice was hollow, exhausted. Quote, but one. Quote, two, I asked. Quote, three. Quote, four. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat at my desk and tried to rationalize what was happening. Wind, animals, some natural process that distributed petals in patterns that only seemed deliberate. But I knew better. The next Thursday, I arrived at Vault 18 at dawn. I wanted to be there when the petals appeared. I wanted to see how they arrived, who brought them, what mechanism explained this. I sat on a stone bench 20 feet from the vault and waited. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the cemetery grounds. Birds sang. Dew settled on the grass. Everything was normal. At 7:07 in the morning, the petals appeared, not blown by wind, not scattered by hand. They simply materialized, one by one, falling from nothing, drifting down to the ground around Vault 18. White rose petals, fresh and perfect, landing in precise locations, forming their pattern. I watched 49 petals fall from empty air and arrange themselves in 7 clusters. When the last petal touched the ground, I stood up and walked to the vault. I knelt down and looked closely at the petals. They were real, physical. I could touch them, smell them, feel their delicate texture, but they had fallen from nowhere. I left them there that day. I could not bring myself to sweep them away. The pattern continued. Every Thursday at 7:07, the petals appeared, sometimes in clusters, sometimes forming shapes, hands, feet. Once a series of 7 tiny hearts. I stopped trying to explain it to anyone. I stopped documenting it. I simply accepted that every 7 days, Sarah Whitfield's vault would be surrounded by 49 white rose petals, and I would leave them until the next morning, and then I would sweep them away. On the 14th week, exactly 98 days after Sarah's interment, the petals formed words, tiny letters, each made of 7 petals arranged in delicate script. Quote, Vav. I stood looking at those words for a long time. Then I knelt down and whispered, quote, 6. The next Thursday, the petals appeared as usual, 7 clusters, 7 petals each, but arranged in a new pattern, a circle but open at one point, not closed, not complete. The following week, the circle was more open. The week after, more still. I understood what I was seeing. The circle was unraveling. The pattern was breaking. After 98 days of appearing every Thursday, the petals were changing their configuration, slowly releasing their hold on the number 7. On the 21st week, 147 days after Sarah Whitfield's death, only 42 petals appeared, 6 clusters of 7. The next week, 35 petals, 5 clusters. The week after that, 28, then 21, then 14. On the 26th Thursday, 7 petals appeared, just 7, arranged in a simple line leading from the vault entrance toward the rising sun. The following Thursday, I arrived at 7:07 and waited. No petals fell. I sat on the stone bench until 8 o'clock, watching Vault 18, waiting for the familiar drift of white petals from nowhere. But the air remained empty. The ground stayed clear. Sarah Whitfield had counted to 7 for 26 weeks, 7 clusters for 7 losses, appearing every 7 days. And now, finally, the counting had stopped. I like to think she found what she needed. I like to think the petals were a way of mourning, of marking what she had lost, of honoring the 7 children who never drew breath. And I like to think that after 26 weeks of counting, she was finally able to let go. I still check Vault 18 every Thursday morning. I arrive at 7:07 and I wait. The petals have not returned, but sometimes, when the light is right and the morning is quiet, I see a single white rose petal on the ground near the vault. Just one. Not part of a pattern, not counting anything, just a small, gentle reminder that Sarah Whitfield was here, that she counted, that her losses mattered, and that somewhere she has finally stopped counting. My voice comes back to me from Vault 47 with a 3-second delay, and the man buried there spent his entire life in silence. My name is Floyd Garrison, and I have worked as a crypt inspector at Riverside Memorial Gardens in Louisville, Kentucky for 12 years. My job requires me to conduct monthly structural assessments of our underground vaults, checking for water damage, foundation settling, and any signs of deterioration that might compromise the integrity of the interment spaces. I work alone, moving through corridors with my flashlight and clipboard, speaking my observations aloud into a voice recorder for documentation purposes. I have inspected Vault 47 dozens of times over the years. It was never unusual until the day I realized it was listening. The first time I noticed the echo, I thought it was an acoustic anomaly. Old buildings develop strange sound properties. Stone corridors can create unexpected resonances. I was conducting my standard inspection in late September, standing in front of Vault 47, dictating my observations into my handheld recorder. Vault 47, marble facade intact, no visible cracks, moisture levels normal. 3 seconds after I finished speaking, I heard my own voice again. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Vault 47, marble facade intact, no visible cracks, moisture levels normal. The same words, the same cadence, my voice echoed back to me with a precise 3-second delay. I stopped recording and listened. The corridor was silent, except for the hum of the ventilation system. I spoke again, experimentally, testing echo. 3 seconds passed. Then, from somewhere near Vault 47, I heard it. Testing echo. I walked down the corridor, checking adjacent vaults, looking for air ducts or ventilation shafts that might explain the acoustic phenomenon. I found nothing unusual. The echo seemed to originate from Vault 47 itself, as if the sealed chamber behind that marble facade were somehow capturing my voice and playing it back. I made a note in my inspection log and continued my rounds. Acoustic anomaly, Vault 47, requires monitoring. The next month, I returned with a decibel meter and a sound recording device. I wanted to measure the echo, to document it scientifically, to understand the mechanism. I stood in front of Vault 47 and spoke clearly. This is a test of acoustic properties. I waited, watching the timer on my phone. 3 seconds. Exactly 3 seconds. Then my voice returned. This is a test of acoustic properties. The decibel meter registered the echo. The sound recorder captured it. I had evidence that this was real, that I was not imagining it. I pulled the burial records for Vault 47 that afternoon. I wanted to know who was interred there, whether there was something about the construction or the burial that might explain the acoustic properties. The vault held one occupant, Gerald Marcus Thorne, born May 2nd, 1939, died August 18th, 2024. Cause of death, complications from pneumonia. The personal information section included a detail that made me pause. Gerald Thorne had been profoundly deaf from birth. He had never heard a sound in his 75 years of life. I sat with that information for a long time. A deaf man, a man who lived in permanent silence. And now his vault echoed every sound spoken near it with a 3-second delay. The pattern continued every month. I would conduct my inspection, speak my observations aloud, and Vault 47 would repeat them back to me exactly 3 seconds later. The delay never varied. The echo never failed to appear. I started testing it deliberately. I would say random phrases, nonsense words, anything to confirm that this was not my imagination playing tricks on me. The sky is purple today. 3 seconds. The sky is purple today. I am standing in corridor B. 3 seconds. I am standing in corridor B. Every phrase came back to me perfectly, my voice identical, the timing mechanical and precise. I mentioned it to our facility manager, Catherine Weiss, during a routine meeting. I kept my tone casual, clinical, as if reporting any other structural observation. Vault 47 has an unusual acoustic property, I said. There's a 3-second echo when you speak near it. Catherine looked at me skeptically. An echo? In a sealed vault? I've recorded it. I can show you the audio files. She listened to my recordings, her expression shifting from skepticism to confusion. That's strange. Have you checked for air gaps in the seal? Multiple times. The vault is completely sealed. No cracks, no openings. Maybe it's sound bouncing from somewhere else in the corridor. I've tested that. The echo only occurs at Vault 47, nowhere else. Catherine agreed to come down and witness it herself. We stood together in front of Vault 47, and I spoke clearly. Testing echo for verification. We waited. 3 seconds passed, then my voice returned. Testing echo for verification. Catherine's face went pale. Quote 20. Quote 21. She reached out and placed her hand on the marble facade. Quote 22. Quote 23. Catherine spoke next, her voice uncertain. Quote 24. 3 seconds, then her voice came back. Quote 25. We stood in that corridor, both of us listening to the impossible echo, and I saw tears forming in Catherine's eyes. He never heard his own name spoken aloud, she whispered, not once in his entire life. I did not know what to say to that. Over the following months, I started speaking differently during my inspections of Vault 47. Less clinical, more personal. I would greet Gerald Thorne by name. I would tell him about the weather, about the cemetery grounds, about nothing in particular. Good morning, Gerald. It's a beautiful day outside. The leaves are turning. 3 seconds. Good morning, Gerald. It's a beautiful day outside. The leaves are turning. I do not know if he can hear me. I do not know if the echo means anything beyond a strange acoustic phenomenon that I cannot explain. But I think about a man who lived 75 years in silence, who never heard music or laughter or his own voice. And now, whatever remains of Gerald Thorne in Vault 47 repeats everything spoken near him, capturing sound and sending it back, as if making up for a lifetime of deafness with an eternity of echoes. Last month, I brought a musician friend to the crypt. Sarah Chen plays violin, and I asked her if she would perform something near Vault 47. I did not tell her why. I simply asked her to play. She stood in front of the vault and performed a Bach partita. Beautiful, sorrowful, complex. The melody filled the corridor, echoing naturally off the stone walls. When she finished, we waited. 3 seconds later, the music came back. Not echo, not reverberation. The exact melody, note for note, played back to us from Vault 47, a violin's voice emerging from a sealed chamber where a deaf man rests. Sarah looked at me, her violin still raised, her eyes wide, said, quote, 32. I visit Vault 47 every week now, not just during monthly inspections. I stand in front of it and I speak. Sometimes I read poetry. Sometimes I describe the sunset. Sometimes I just talk about my day, knowing that everything I say will come back to me 3 seconds later in my own voice. Because Gerald Thorne lived in silence, and now he lives in sound. Every was spoken near his vault returns, repeated, preserved, heard. And I think that is a kind of grace. I think that is a kind of answer to a lifetime of questions he could never hear. Last week, I said something I had been thinking for months. Quote 33. 3 seconds passed. Then my voice came back. Quote 34. And beneath my echoed words, so faint I almost missed it, I heard something else. A whisper, not my voice, one else's. Thank you. I have not told anyone about that whisper. I have not recorded it or tried to capture it again. Because I think Gerald Thorne answered me, and some answers are not meant to be documented. Some answers are meant to be heard once and remembered and honored with silence. But I still speak to Vault 47 every week, and every week, 3 seconds later, my words come back to me, and I listen for that whisper beneath the echo, that single word that tells me Gerald Thorne is finally, after 75 years of silence, able to hear. The music box appeared on the crypt step between my morning inspection and my afternoon rounds, and it plays a lullaby for a child who has been silent for 54 years. My name is Director James Park, and I have managed Willowbrook Memorial Cemetery in Portland, Maine for 16 years. I am responsible for maintaining the dignity and security of our facilities, which includes monitoring the mausoleum for any unauthorized activity or unusual occurrences. I perform 2 walkthroughs daily, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, checking that everything remains undisturbed. On November 12th, something appeared that should not have been possible. The morning inspection was routine. I walked through the main mausoleum corridor at 8:15, checking vault seals, verifying that no flowers had been disturbed, ensuring the space remained pristine for visitors. Vault 23, which holds an infant interred in 1971, was clear. The small marble step in front of the vault was empty, recently cleaned by our maintenance staff. I noted this specifically in my log because we have had issues with well meaning visitors leaving toys and stuffed animals at children's graves, items that deteriorate in the weather and create maintenance problems. Vault 23 is located inside the climate controlled mausoleum, but we still discourage leaving objects that might attract dust or require cleaning. The step was empty at 8:15. I documented it. I moved on with my inspection. At 2:30 that afternoon, I conducted my second walkthrough. When I reached Vault 23, there was a music box sitting on the step. I stopped walking and stared at it. The box was small, maybe 4 inches square, made of polished wood with delicate brass hinges. It looked old but well maintained, the kind of heirloom piece someone might keep on a dresser or nightstand. The wood grain caught the light from the corridor fixtures, and I could see a small winding key protruding from the back. I looked around the corridor. Empty, silent, no visitors, no staff members, just me and this music box that had not been there 6 hours earlier. I checked the visitor log on my phone. No one had signed in to visit the mausoleum since 10 o'clock that morning, and that visitor had gone to a vault in a completely different section. I photographed the music box from multiple angles, documenting its position, its condition, its presence. Then I picked it up carefully, checking for any note or identification that might explain who had left it. There was nothing, just a wooden music box with a brass winding key. I turned the key 3 times and opened the lid. The mechanism engaged immediately, and a soft melody began to play. A lullaby. Simple, gentle, the kind of tune you might hum to a baby at bedtime. The sound was delicate and clear, the metal tines plinking against the cylinder with perfect precision. I stood in that quiet corridor, holding a music box that played a lullaby, directly in front of a vault that held an infant who died in 1971. I let the music play until the mechanism wound down and silence returned. Then I closed the lid and carried the music box back to my office. I pulled the burial records for Vault 23. Emma Rose Callahan, born March 3rd, 1971. Died June 7th, 1971, 3 months old. Sudden infant death syndrome, The file included a photograph from the funeral service, a tiny white casket, a grief-stricken young couple, and in the background, barely visible, a woman holding what looked like a music box. I enlarged the photograph on my computer screen. The music box in the woman's hands appeared identical to the one now sitting on my desk. I called the contact number listed in the file. A woman answered, her voice elderly and cautious. Quote, 0. There was a long silence. Then, quote, 1, quote, 2, quote, she said softly. Quote, 4. I hesitated. Quote, another long silence. When Mrs. Callahan spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. My hands went cold. I looked at the music box on my desk. Quote 11. Quote 12. I opened the lid. The mechanism engaged, and Brahms' lullaby filled my office. Mrs. Callahan heard it through the phone. I heard her start to cry. That's impossible, she whispered. That's Emma's music box. I did not know what to say. I apologized for disturbing her, told her I would look into the matter, and ended the call. Then I sat at my desk, staring at a music box that should have been sealed in a casket for 54 years. I returned to Vault 23 the next morning. The music box was back on the step. I had left it locked in my office overnight. I had the only key to that office. No one else had access. But the music box was sitting on the vault step again, positioned carefully, deliberately, as if placed by loving hands. I picked it up, carried it back to my office, and locked it in my desk drawer. I documented everything, the photographs, the phone call, the impossibility of the situation. The following morning, it was back on the vault step. I stopped trying to remove it after that. I stopped trying to explain it. Because Emma Rose Callahan died 54 years ago, and her mother placed a music box in her casket, and now that music box appears on the vault step every morning. I have tested every rational explanation. I have reviewed security footage, which shows nothing. I have checked the vault seal, which remains intact. I have questioned staff members who know nothing about the music box. The box appears. I wind it. It plays Brahms' lullaby. Then I leave it on the step, and the next morning it is gone, only to reappear later. I called Mrs. Callahan again last week. I told her the music box kept returning to Emma's vault, that I had stopped trying to remove it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Maybe Emma needs it. Maybe she's been alone long enough." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Let her keep it, please. Let her have her music box." So I do. Every morning during my inspection, I check Vault 23. Most days the music box is there. I wind it carefully, let it play its lullaby, and leave it on the step. Some mornings it is gone. Those mornings feel heavier, emptier, as if something has been taken away. But it always comes back. Within a day or two, the music box reappears, sitting on that marble step, waiting to be wound, waiting to play its gentle melody for a child who has been silent for 54 years. I do not tell visitors about the music box. I do not advertise its presence. But sometimes, when I am conducting my afternoon walkthrough, I see it sitting on the step and I stop to wind it. Because Emma Rose Callahan was 3 months old when she died. She never grew up. She never had birthday parties or learned to walk or heard bedtime stories. But she has a lullaby, and every day someone winds the music box and plays it for her. Sometimes I think I hear other sounds when the lullaby plays. Soft sounds, baby sounds, cooing or laughing, or the small noises infants make when they are content. I tell myself it is my imagination, that the acoustics in the mausoleum create strange auditory illusions, that grief and empathy can make you hear things that are not there. But I keep winding the music box every morning, every afternoon when it appears, because somewhere I think Emma is listening, and I think she is not alone anymore. Last week I found the music box positioned differently, not on the step, but leaning against the vault door, as if someone had held it close, and the winding key had been turned recently. The music box was still playing when I found it, the last few notes of the lullaby fading into silence. I did not wind it that day. Someone else had already done it, and I think I know who. Every brass nameplate in the mausoleum is cold to the touch except one, and the woman buried in Vault 9 died burning from the inside. My name is Yuki Tanaka, and I have worked as a maintenance worker at Hillcrest Memorial Park in Seattle, Washington for 10 years. My responsibilities include polishing the brass nameplates on our mausoleum vaults, a task I perform weekly to prevent tarnish and maintain the dignified appearance our families expect. I touch hundreds of brass plates every month. I know the exact temperature they should be. Cool, slightly below room temperature, the way metal always feels when it is not exposed to direct heat. Vault 9's nameplate is different. It radiates heat like a fevered body, and it has been that way since the day Catherine Price was interred. The first time I noticed the temperature difference, I thought I had touched the plate immediately after someone else had handled it. Body heat transfer is normal. Brass conducts warmth efficiently, holding the temperature of human touch for several minutes. I made a mental note and continued my polishing routine. But when I returned to Vault 9 10 minutes later to buff the plate to a final shine, it was still warm, not cooling, not fading to ambient temperature. Warm, almost hot. I pulled my hand back and stared at the nameplate. Catherine Ann Price, 1964 to 2025. Beloved mother, sister, friend. I touched the nameplate on Vault 8, directly adjacent. Cool. As expected, I touched Vault 10 on the other side. Also cool. I returned my hand to Vault 9's brass plate. Hot. Uncomfortably hot. Like touching metal that had been sitting in direct sunlight. The mausoleum has no windows. No direct sunlight reaches the interior vaults. And it was February, with an outside temperatures barely reaching 40 degrees. I checked the HVAC system, thinking perhaps warm air was blowing directly on Vault Nine's nameplate. The nearest vent was 15 feet away, and the airflow was consistent throughout the corridor. No concentrated heat source. I pulled my infrared thermometer from my equipment cart and measured the temperature of Vault Nine's brass nameplate. 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. I measured it again. Same reading. 98.6 degrees. Body temperature. I measured the adjacent nameplates. 62 degrees. Normal. Expected. Vault Nine's brass was 36 degrees warmer than it should have been. I reported the anomaly to our cemetery director, Michael Santos. I showed him my temperature readings, explained the situation as clinically as possible. He came down to the mausoleum and confirmed the measurements himself. Quote, 0, he said, touching the nameplate and jerking his hand back. Quote, 1, quote, quote, 3. I showed him the building schematics. No electrical infrastructure near Vault 9, no plumbing, no heat sources of any kind. Michael called in an electrician and a building inspector. They examined Vault 9 thoroughly, checking for every possible mechanical explanation. They found nothing. The vault was constructed identically to every other vault in the row. Standard materials, standard installation, no anomalies. Except the brass nameplate was 98.6 degrees. I pulled Catherine Price's burial records that evening. I needed to understand who she was, whether there was something about her death that might explain the impossible heat. The cause of death stopped me cold. Sepsis. Bacterial infection that had spread throughout her body, causing systemic inflammation and organ failure. In the final hours, according to the medical summary, her body temperature had spiked to 105 degrees. The fever had killed her, 98.6 degrees, body temperature, the temperature of a living person, not fever temperature, but the warmth of life itself. I returned to Vault 9 the next morning. The nameplate was still hot. I measured it daily for a week. The temperature never varied, always 98.6 degrees, always warm, always wrong. Other staff members began to notice. Our florist, David Kim, complained that the flowers he placed near Vault 9 wilted faster than flowers anywhere else in the mausoleum. Our chaplain mentioned feeling uncomfortably warm when conducting services near that section. I started avoiding Vault 9. During my weekly polishing routine, I would save it for last, touching the nameplate as briefly as possible, buffing it quickly, and moving on. The heat made my skin crawl, not because it hurt, but because it felt alive. 3 months after Catherine Price's interment, something changed. I was polishing the nameplates on a Tuesday morning when I touched Vault 9 and felt the temperature spike, not 98.6 anymore. Hotter. I pulled out my infrared thermometer, 101 degrees. I measured it again, thinking I had made an error. Same reading. The nameplate had gotten hotter. Over the following weeks, I documented the temperature fluctuations. Some days it would be 98.6. Other days 100. Once it spiked to 103. I started tracking the pattern, trying to find some correlation. Weather, time of day, visitor activity, anything that might explain the variations. I found nothing. The temperature seemed to fluctuate randomly, rising and falling without pattern, until I noticed the dates. The temperature would spike on Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, the nameplate would register between 100 and 103 degrees. Every other day, it would be 98.6. I checked Catherine Price's medical records again. She had been admitted to the hospital on a Tuesday. Her fever had spiked on a Tuesday. She had died on a Tuesday. The brass nameplate was remembering her dying day every week. I stopped measuring the temperature after that. I simply accepted that Vault Nine's nameplate would be warm, that some Tuesdays it would be hot, that Catherine Price's fever was somehow preserved in the brass that bore her name. But last month, something changed. I was polishing the nameplates on a Wednesday morning, and when I touched Vault 9, the brass was cool. Not warm, cool, like every other nameplate in the corridor. I stood there with my polishing cloth, staring at my hand on that brass plate, feeling the coolness against my palm, and I did not know whether to be relieved or heartbroken. I measured it. 62 degrees, normal, finally, mercifully normal. I thought it was over. I thought whatever had been keeping that nameplate warm had finally dissipated, that Catherine Price had finally found peace. But the next Tuesday, the heat returned, 102 degrees. And I understood. The fever comes back every Tuesday because that is when Catherine Price remembers dying. That is when her body remembers fighting the infection, spiking with heat, trying desperately to burn out the bacteria that was killing her. 6 days a week, Vault 9 is normal. The brass is cool. Catherine Price rests quietly. But on Tuesdays, she burns again. I have told no one about the pattern. I simply polish the brass on Vault 9, the same as all the others, noting the temperature silently, documenting it in a private log I keep for myself. Because Catherine Price died of sepsis. She died burning with fever. And at every Tuesday, her nameplate remembers that heat. I have stopped trying to explain it. I have stopped looking for mechanical causes. Because I know what this is. This is a body's memory, preserved in brass, repeating the worst moments of Catherine Price's final days. Last Tuesday, the temperature spiked to 105 degrees, the exact fever that killed her. I touched the nameplate for just a second, and I had to pull my hand away. The heat was intense, painful, the kind of heat that damages tissue. And I thought about Catherine Price, dying with that fever inside her, burning from within, her body fighting a battle it could not win. I left the nameplate unpolished that day. I could not touch it, could not hold my hand against that terrible heat. But today is Wednesday, and I am standing in front of Vault 9 with my polishing cloth. The brass is cool again, 62 degrees, normal. I polish it carefully, thoroughly, until it gleams. Because 6 days a week, Catherine Price is at rest. And I can honor that rest by keeping her nameplate beautiful. But on Tuesdays, she burns. And all I can do is bear witness to that burning and remember that fever took her life and hope that someday the heat will fade for good. The letters on Vault 12 change when I am not looking directly at them, and I have 147 photographs that prove I am not imagining this. My name is Saul Brennan, and I have worked as a groundskeeper at St. Michael's Cemetery in Providence, Rhode Island, for 23 years. I know every vault, every headstone, every name carved into marble in this place. I have walked these grounds thousands of times. I know what should be permanent and what should change. Names engraved in stone should not move, but the name on Vault 12 does, and I have documented every variation with the methodical precision of a man trying to prove his own sanity. The first time I noticed the discrepancy, I thought I had misremembered. I was conducting my morning inspection of the mausoleum vaults, walking down the main corridor with my clipboard, checking for vandalism or damage. Vault 12 sits midway down the row, a standard marble facade with a brass nameplate. I had read that nameplate hundreds of times. Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore, 1897 to 1972. That morning, I glanced at it and continued walking. 3 steps past the vault, something in my mind registered as wrong. I stopped and looked back. Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore, 1897 to 1972. The name was identical, but something felt different. I stared at the nameplate, trying to identify what had triggered my sense of wrongness. The letters were the same, the dates were the same, everything appeared correct. I shrugged it off and continued my inspection. The next morning, I approached Vault 12 and read the nameplate carefully. Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore. Whitmore, not Whitmore. The I and T had switched positions. I stepped closer, studying the engraving. The letters looked original, properly carved, showing the same weathering and patina as the rest of the nameplate. This was not recent vandalism. The letters looked like they had always been arranged this way, but I knew what I had read yesterday. Whitmore, with the T before the I. I pulled out my phone and photographed the nameplate. I documented the date, the time, the spelling. Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore. I checked the cemetery records when I returned to the office. The burial registry listed Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore with a T. The original engraving order from 1972 specified Whitmore, but the nameplate read Whitemore. The following morning, I approached Vault 12 with my phone already recording video. I wanted to catch any change, any shift, any evidence of what was happening. The nameplate read Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore. The letters had returned to their correct arrangement. I reviewed my video footage. The cameras showed me approaching the vault, the nameplate coming into focus, the letters clearly spelling Whitmore. No change, no shift, just the correct spelling, as if yesterday had never happened. I checked my photograph from the previous day, Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore. The image was clear, undoctored, time-stamped. I started photographing the nameplate every single day. Morning and afternoon, 2 photographs per day, documenting every visit to Vault 12. The spelling changed constantly. Sometimes it was Whitmore, sometimes Whitemore. Once it read Whitemore, another time Whitmore. The letters would rearrange themselves in subtle ways, never dramatically different, always close enough to the original name that a casual observer might not notice, but I noticed and I documented every variation. After a month, I had 60 photographs showing 17 different spelling variations. I created a spreadsheet cataloging each one, noting the date and time, trying to find a pattern. There was no pattern. The name changed randomly, unpredictably, without logic. I tried an experiment. I stood in front of Vault 12 and stared directly at the nameplate for 15 minutes, watching the letters, waiting for them to move. Nothing happened. The name remained stable as long as I watched it. Then I turned my back for 10 seconds, counting slowly, and looked again. The letters had changed. Jonathan Aldrich Whitemore. I repeated the experiment. Stare at the nameplate, turn away, look back. The spelling was different every time. The letters only moved when I was not watching. I tried setting up a camera to record the nameplate continuously. I positioned it on a tripod, started recording, and left the mausoleum for an hour. When I reviewed the footage, the nameplate spelling remained constant throughout the entire recording. Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore, no change. But when I returned to the mausoleum in person and looked at Vault 12, it read Jonathan Aldrich Whitemore. The changes only happened when I was physically present, but not looking directly at the nameplate. The camera could not capture the shifts. Only I could witness them, and only in the moments between glances. I pulled Jonathan Whitmore's burial records and read them thoroughly. Standard death, natural causes, family service, nothing unusual. I found a newspaper obituary from 1972 with a photograph. The obituary spelled his name, Whitmore, with a T. I contacted his surviving relatives. A great niece, Emily Carson, still lived in Providence. I called her and asked, as casually as I could manage, about the spelling of her great uncle's name. She said, I lied. Quote, so three, quote plus 4. I thanked her and ended the call. That afternoon, I went to Vault 12 with my phone ready. The nameplate read Jonathan Aldrich Whittemore. The I had migrated to a new position, creating a spelling that made no phonetic sense. I photographed it, number 83 in my collection. I began to dread my morning inspections. Not because the shifting name frightened me exactly, but because it made me question reality itself. Every day, I would approach Vault 12 knowing the letters would be different, knowing that something impossible was happening, knowing that I had no way to prove it to anyone who was not standing next to me watching it happen. And the changes were accelerating. In the beginning, the name might shift every few days. Now it changed daily, sometimes multiple times per day. I documented everything. I printed the photographs and created a physical board in my office, pinning each variation, drawing lines between them, looking for meaning in the chaos. I found none. Last week, something new happened. I was conducting my afternoon inspection, approaching Vault 12 with my phone ready, when I noticed the letters were moving. Not settling after a change, actually moving, a shifting position slowly, like liquid metal, flowing from one arrangement to another. I fumbled with my phone, trying to start the camera, my hands shaking. By the time I had the video recording, The letters had stopped moving and settled into a new configuration. Jonathan Aldrich Whitemore. The C and H in Aldrich had switched places. I recorded for 5 minutes, watching the letters, waiting for them to move again. They remained still. I turned the camera off and looked away, counting to 5. When I looked back, the nameplate read something I had never seen before. Not a variation of Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore, a completely different arrangement. I am still here, Jonathan. The letters had rearranged themselves into a sentence, using the same letters, the same brass, but configured into words that made my blood run cold. I photographed it immediately. Image 147. Then I stepped back from the vault and spoke aloud. I turned out for 3 seconds and looked back. The nameplate read, "Yes." I have not shown these photographs to anyone. I have not reported the changes, because Jonathan Aldrich Whitmore has been dead for 53 years, and somehow the letters of his name are moving, shifting, speaking. I visit Vault 12 every day now. I bring my phone, I photograph the nameplate, and I watch the letters rearrange themselves into messages. Sometimes they form his name correctly, sometimes they scramble into nonsense, but occasionally, when I ask questions, the letters configure into answers. Quote 6, not yet. Quote 7, to be remembered correctly. Quote 8, keep watching, so I do. I keep watching Vault 12. I keep photographing the changing name. I keep documenting the impossible. Because Jonathan Whitmore's name has been misspelled in stone for 53 years, and he has been trying to correct it letter by letter, shift by shift, every time someone looks away. And I am the only one who has noticed. I am the only one still watching. I found the note tucked under Vault 17's door this morning, and the handwriting is not mine, despite 3 years of working alone in this section. My name is Ramona Torres, and I have worked as the crypt keeper at Our Lady of Mercy Mausoleum in Albuquerque, New Mexico for 9 years. For the past 3 years, I have been solely responsible for the maintenance and oversight of Section D, a quiet corridor of 48 vaults housing interments dating back to the 1960s. I work alone. I have always worked alone. No one else has key access to this section. That is why the note disturbs me so profoundly, because it thanks me for company I did not know I was providing. The note appeared on a Tuesday morning in late October. I unlocked the iron gate to Section D at 7 o'clock, the same time I unlock it every morning, and began my standard inspection routine. I check vault seals, remove any debris, ensure the corridor remains pristine and respectful. Vault 17 sits midway down the eastern wall. Maria Elena Sandoval, interred August 3rd, 2022. I have walked past this vault hundreds of times over the past 3 years, maintaining it the same as all the others, polishing the brass nameplate weekly, checking the marble seal monthly. That morning, there was a folded piece of paper tucked under the vault door, positioned carefully as if someone had slid it through the narrow gap between the door and the marble threshold. I picked it up and unfolded it. The paper was cream colored, quality stationery, the kind someone might use for formal correspondence. The message was written in elegant cursive, blue ink, 3 simple sentences. Thank you for keeping me company. The silence was unbearable before you came. I am grateful. No signature, no date, just those 3 sentences in handwriting I did not recognize. I looked around the corridor. Empty, silent. The gate had been locked all night. I had unlocked it myself just about minutes earlier. No one else had been in this section. I folded the note and placed it in my pocket. I told myself it was from a family member, someone who had visited during public hours and left a thank you note for the crypt keeping staff. It was unusual, certainly, but not impossible. But something about the note bothered me. The phrasing, before you came. I had been working Section D for 3 years. Maria Sandoval had been interred 3 years ago. The timing aligned too perfectly. I pulled Maria Sandoval's burial records that afternoon. Standard information. Age 78, natural causes, survived by 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren. The personal notes section mentioned she had been a writer, that she had published several books of poetry, that she had loved words and language. I searched for samples of her handwriting. I found her signature on the burial authorization form. Elegant cursive, blue ink preference, noted in the funeral home's records. I compared it to the note in my pocket. The handwriting but etched. Not similar, identical. The same flowing script, the same distinctive capital T in thank you, the same slight rightward slant. I sat at my desk with both documents in front of me, trying to construct a rational explanation. A daughter with similar handwriting, a granddaughter who had learned penmanship from Maria, a deliberate forgery meant to honor the deceased. But none of those explanations addressed the core impossibility. The note had been tucked under a sealed vault door in a locked corridor that only I could access. I returned to Vault 17 the next morning, half expecting to find another note. The corridor was empty. No paper, no messages, just marble and silence. But a week later, there was another note. Same cream stationery, same elegant cursive, same blue ink. I listen to your footsteps every morning. They remind me I am not forgotten. Thank you. I photographed the note this time, documenting its position, its content, its impossible presence. Then I spoke aloud, my voice strange in the silent corridor. Maria, is that you? No response, just stone and stillness. I left the note where I had found it and continued my inspection. When I returned an hour later, the note was gone. The pattern continued over the following months. Every few weeks, I would find a note tucked under Vault 17's door. Always the same stationery, always the same handwriting, always messages of gratitude. Quote 5. Quote 6. Quote 7. The notes described my routines with perfect accuracy. Things I did alone in an empty corridor with no witnesses. My habit of humming while I mopped, my practice of leaving flowers near the smaller vaults that held children, my custom of greeting each nameplate by name as I polished the brass. No one knew these things. No one observed me during my solitary work, but Maria Sandoval described them perfectly. I started talking to Vault 17 during my morning inspections, not continuously, but occasionally. Small comments about the weather, observations about the cemetery grounds. Nothing profound, just the kind of small talk you might make with a companion. The notes changed in response. Quote 8, quote 9, quote 10. Maria Sandoval was responding to my conversations, not with the instantaneous back and forth of normal dialogue, but with delayed written responses that appeared days later, tucked under her vault door, written in her own hand. I have 73 notes now, collected over 3 years. I keep them in a locked drawer in my office, organized chronologically, evidence of an impossible correspondence with a woman who has been dead since 2022. I no longer question the mechanism. I no longer try to explain how a deceased woman writes notes and slides them under her own vault door. I simply accept that Maria Sandoval is still here, still listening, still grateful for company, because the notes have taught me something important. Maria was a writer. She worked with words. She valued communication and expression and the connection language creates between people. And when she died, she found herself in silence, complete, absolute silence, until I arrived with my humming and my greetings and my habit of narrating my work aloud. I gave her words again, and she responded the only way she could. Last week's note was different from the others. I think I am ready to go now. The silence does not frighten me anymore. You taught me that company can exist in memory, in kindness, in small gestures made with care. Thank you for these 3 years. Thank you for making death feel less isolating. Goodbye, Ramona. I read that note 17 times before I could fold it and place it with the others. I have not found a note since. Every morning, I unlock Section D at 7 o'clock. I walk to Vault 17 and check for cream-colored stationery tucked under the door. Nothing. But I still talk to Maria Sandoval during my inspections. I still tell her about the hummingbirds and the sunsets and the small details of my day. I still greet her nameplate when I polish the brass. Because for 3 years, Maria and I kept each other company. She was grateful for my words, and I was grateful for her notes. And even though the correspondence has ended, I think some part of her still listens. Some part of her still appreciates the sound of footsteps in the corridor, the voice that greets her by name, the human presence that makes the silence bearable. I found something this morning, though. Not a note, something else. A single cream-colored envelope, unsealed, empty, placed carefully on the step in front of Vault 17. I picked it up and looked inside. No paper, no message, but written on the outside of the envelope, in elegant blue cursive, 2 words. Thank you. I keep that envelope in my pocket now. I carry it with me during my morning inspections, a reminder that I was not alone for 3 years, that my work mattered to someone beyond myself. Because Maria Sandoval has been dead for 3 years, but she left me 73 notes thanking me for company, and I will carry that gratitude with me for the rest of my life. And I will keep talking to Vault 17. Keep humming while I work. Keep making this place feel less lonely, because death is silence. But kindness is something that echoes beyond silence, and sometimes, if you listen carefully, the dead find ways to say thank you.